I'm George Richards. I'm a director at JRP Solutions. As you can tell by my hairline, I've been in and around energy and more latterly net zero for quite a long time. So I'm here today to talk to you about the pathway to net zero and more importantly, how to turn ideas into action. There's been an awful lot of talk over the last few years, but not that much action. So let's get that focus in. A little bit of background to JRP. We've been around since 1999. We're regarded as being the UK's leading independent energy and net zero specialist. We are technology and supplier agnostic, which is, I think, really important. And we're uniquely pragmatic and practical. I guess our focus has been certainly in the early days in the manufacturing sector. So you have to look at, in those days, energy in that context. So the theory doesn't always work in practice. So that knowledge and experience is there. We've taken that forward into the net zero space. We work across all sectors. Our sister company, the Green Consultancy, work primarily in the higher education sector. We work primarily in industrial and commercial sectors. And I think it's really important that we walk the walk, not just talk about it. So we're ISO 9001, 50001 accredited. We're also a B Corp. And we have a net zero target to be net zero by 2030. I was told yesterday we'll probably achieve that an awful lot sooner. We've only got 90 tonnes of residual emissions that we're going to either offset credibly or inset. We operate across 4 core business areas, and this is important context. Energy management, as I said, is where we started. So it's everything around managing energy. It's not the supply of it, and it's not the supply of plant or equipment. Net zero, we began our transition to become a broader net zero business about 5 years ago. So we're a little bit ahead of the game, I'd suggest. We've probably got 35, 40 net zero clients, and some of those are at different stages of their journey. And some of those are now moving into the implementation of their net zero strategies and action plans. And that's what we'll focus on a little bit later. Asset management is also a fairly unique skill set that we have. And that's when you start talking about outsourcing strategies, PPAs, EPCs, things of that nature. You have to have the knowledge and the insight to be able to negotiate the right sort of supporting agreements to help you to implement moving forward, particularly on larger capital projects like CHP plants, solar, and other forms of renewable. And finally, I think those of you that are more mature in your journeys, you'll find that net zero is sort of evolving and becoming ESG, which is much broader. ESG is sort of AKA sustainability. In the old days, people didn't know what on earth sustainability was, to be honest. It was a nice fluffy word that was bandied about. But in reality, sustainability is ESG. Okay, so it's not just about carbon, it's about social responsibility as well, things like, child labour, bribery, all that sort of good stuff, or bad stuff. And of course, we're operating in a fast changing world. Net zero, I guess, sort of scares a lot of people, particularly when they start looking at scope 3. But as Mark Carney said, it's the greatest commercial opportunity of our time, certainly in this space. I at first struggled to understand exactly what he meant by that, because I think, like a lot of people, knee-jerk reaction was, oh my goodness, it's going to cost us a lot of money. How are we going to do it? It's not the case at all. And I'll dive into a little bit of that, but I'll give you an example of that. We've done an awful lot of work around life carbon assessments on products, on events even, materials, etc. Why would someone want to do that? Well, because it differentiates them from their competitors and it shows them that they're ahead of the game. So we're all being asked increasingly to show our environmental credentials. Where's your net zero plan? When are you going to achieve net zero, etc. And that's trickling down throughout all supply chains. So if you can show that right down to a product level or to a material level or even an event, that you understand exactly what your impacts are, that's pretty impressive stuff. And of course, we had the energy crisis. So that's really brought even more focus in the boardrooms. That's always been the problem in the past. We've always wanted to do the right things, but we've not necessarily been empowered to be able to do it, had the budgets or the teams. There's a lot more focus on this subject matter now moving forward, because guess what? It's costing business an awful lot of money. But we've still got to strike that balance, because we talk about sustainability. That's great. But we've also got to be sustainable as businesses and as organisations. So we can't just chuck loads and loads of money at this blindly. We've got to do it in a very controlled way and do it in the right way. So we'll talk about different delivery mechanisms of opportunities. So we'll take this scenario. So this is our 5-stage net zero process. So when we're first engaging a client that comes to us and says, we've no idea where to start, help. We're being asked for this. We know we need to get on with it. This is the process we take them through. Okay, so it's fairly logical and progressive. And I'll just talk briefly about it. So we start off with a site energy and environmental audit. So that's really to look at how you're managing your energy and environmental impacts, really focusing on scope 1, scope 2, a little bit of scope 3. We also then do a governance review. So that's looking at your existing policies and processes and procedures, and indeed your key supply contracts to see how you're engaging with your suppliers. We calculate your carbon footprint. This is the scary bit for a lot of people, because they look at it and they go, yeah, we know what we're doing, but they're only looking at scope 1, scope 2, because that's the things that's visible, that they can control. When they realize how big their scope 3 is, it scares them. And I understand that. And I remember one client saying, there's 15 categories, where on earth do I start? Well, it's about materiality. So it's which of those 15 categories are most applicable and material to your organization, and that's where you focus. So quite typically it's category 1, which is bought in products and services, i.e. your supply chain. And then quite surprisingly for a lot of people, it's also pensions and investments. That also accounts for an awful lot of your scope 3 emissions. So it's about materiality and focusing on those things that are most material to your organization. We identify through that process your biggest emitters, because it's not just the people you're necessarily spending the most money with, it's what you're buying and where you're buying it from and how you're buying it. That all has an impact on the emissions of your organisation. And then we would use the SBTi free trajectory tool to forecast what your trajectory needs to be to get you to your net zero target, whether that's 2050 or something more ambitious. Depends on where you're at. And then we create an action plan. But whilst the strategy will last for 20, 25 years, the action plan is only focused on a 3 to 5 year window, because there's no point in hanging your hat on technologies that aren't yet proven or waiting for that silver bullet. And it's not always an engineered solution in any case. So we deal with the here and now, what can be practically be done and what's affordable. That's the most important aspect as well. And those strategies and action plans will be different for every single organisation. Even if you've got two businesses doing exactly the same thing, literally in the same location, side by side, their action plan and their strategy will be different, because their suppliers will be different, their culture will be different, where they're at on their journey will be completely different. And that's important. So you've got this nice action plan. Now what? Because that's the common challenge is, brilliant, I know what to do, but I can't do it. And you can't do it quite often because you don't have the resources, i.e. people generally. You don't necessarily have the skills and knowledge, and quite often you don't have the money either. Or you're in that perpetual battle with, if you're in a manufacturing environment, for instance, you're in that battle with production because they want to invest in a new piece of kit. You're trying to save energy and save the world. So it's those sorts of questions and challenges, I guess, that are there for most organisations. Unless you happen to be, cash rich and lots of money flushing around. I've not yet met one of those, but there you go. So where do you start? Start with the simple stuff. When we go in and we do the audits, we come out with a whole list of opportunities and we categorise those opportunities. So we categorise them in 3 basic areas. One is OPEX. OPEX being things that you can do which are low cost, things that you should be doing anyway. So it's about optimising systems like BMS, making sure you're getting good quality metered data, doing the simple things that cost very little, but cumulatively they have a big impact. The second category is CapEx, of course, and you could almost split those into 2. So CapEx projects are opportunities that meet your internal investment criteria. So it could be simple payback of 2 years, for instance, and those that are out with that. So typically, some solar projects, for instance, might have a 5, 6, 7 year payback, whatever it might be. And it's then how you can possibly implement those if they're not meeting your investment criteria. So we'll touch on some alternative delivery mechanisms. And your final category of opportunity or definition would be behaviours. Now, according to the Committee for Climate Change, behaviours could account for up to 50% of GHG emissions reductions. That's significant. And the vast majority of organisations absolutely are blind to it. And it's simple things. We might think back to the old energy behaviour change where You get those little stickers, switch the light off, do this, do that. And people used to laugh at it and all the rest of it, but that's fine. But it's a cumulative impact of the small things. And when it becomes a habit, and I'll bet you most people in this country have started to acquire those habits because their energy bills have gone up at home. So they're very conscious about turning things off and not leaving lights on in the room. But if you can take that culture and behaviour into the workplace, it has a significant impact. So that's a real area of I would say, of focus. And it's low cost as well. And it's sustainable because once you change behaviours, they change forever. I used to do it with my son as he was growing up, and I could hear his PlayStation whirring away upstairs when I called him down for his dinner, and I keep sending him back up. After about 3 or 4 evenings, he got the message and he turned everything off. Either that or he was going to end up with thighs like that, whichever. So some of the typical technologies some of you be familiar with, and engineers in particular love black box technology because they understand it. It's tangible, it's engineering, it's brilliant. It's the things they need to go and have a cold shower for when they look at it. But you're talking about AD plants, you're talking about heat pumps, solar, wind, etc., etc. So we're familiar with those, but they're only addressing your scope 1, scope 2, okay? Which is fine, it's a good starting point. But how do you pay for it? It's always a difficult question to go to the FD and ask for money for these things, particularly when they don't meet the investment criteria of the business. There are a number of different ways in which these can be done. So when we present back the list of opportunities and within that the projects that can be implemented, we give high-level numbers. Say you could do it through an EPC, an energy performance contract. You could do it through a PPA, such as we were just hearing about earlier, or you could find third-party funding. And there are lenders out there. We're dealing with a super broker, if you like, that has access to over 100 lenders. So whatever the circumstance and the credit rating and whatever the project is, there is someone out there that is prepared to lend you the money. So it then becomes an OPEX expense, not a CAPEX expense. And then, of course, you have to have the glue in the middle to make all this work, because you've got to look at, if you talk about scope 1, scope 2, but also scope 3, you've got to look at it holistically. You can't do this on your own. So whether you're looking at it in your own organisation, at your own sites, it's not about putting in magic systems or black boxes. It's about everyone being part of this and everyone making the contribution. You can put in a brand new energy efficient, let's say, baking oven in a factory, but if the operator is still leaving it on, you're still wasting lots of energy. You're just wasting slightly less. And the same applies across all scopes. So there are people like us out there that provide a support service, which is an ongoing, flexible service that can be used and abused as and when you want, non-contractual. Just call upon that expertise as and when you need it, whether it's delivering projects or whether it's delivering behaviour change programs or helping you to calculate your carbon footprint, whatever it is, there's people like that that can provide that expertise.